Ericka, I am so thrilled to talk to you today. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm excited to talk to you. I love talking about our lives as parents.
Me too. I should rephrase that. I like talking to mothers who are willing to be real. And your book was real. It was real life. I remember after I had my first daughter, I just was staring at her, completely overwhelmed. And I remember being a little bit angry. Why didn't any of the moms in my life tell me that parenthood was actually like this? Why didn't we anybody ever decide to talk to me about how hard it is? And so your book is down and dirty honest about the highs, the lows, and everything in between. We're going to talk about your book, but before we talk about your book, let's talk about you. Who are you? What do you do? And why on earth did you write this book?
Well, I am a journalist by training. I've been a journalist for over 20 years. I started my career at People magazine, of all places. I covered health and celebrity. So I did like special issues like Sexiest Man Alive and 50 Most Beautiful. And it was an amazing job to have when you are in your 20s. Right? Really cool. And when I was on maternity leave, actually, I was laid off. And but I did not stop working completely. I went back to work. I was hired at their competitor, Us Weekly, where I kind of did the same thing. I covered um, celebrity moms. I did a little bit of health, but it was mostly celebrity. But once my child got a little bit older, um, actually before he got older, I realized that it was so hard to balance motherhood and family life with a job that could keep me at my desk till 2, 3 a.m. sometimes, waiting on a celebrity to call back to confirm something. And I just felt as though I wanted to do something else. I wanted to write and focus on something else. So I went to a site called Cafe Mom, which is a really popular parenting site, and they hired me to be an editor to shape some of their younger, newer writers. And from there, I just kind of dove full on into parenthood. But I didn't just, assign stories. I went to conferences, I went to mommy meetups, I held my own focus groups. I really wanted to understand what it was like, what life was like for moms across this country, because I found parenthood so hard and so surprising in ways I didn't expect it to be surprising. So that is really, spending time my years there and meeting with moms and talking to women all over from all walks of life really kind of set the seeds for this book. And it's really directed my focus in the last, 7 years. And I love it. I love talking to moms and parents in general about their lives, what they're struggling with, and how we can make it better.
Mm. Well, your answer there really pairs well. I don't know if well is the right word, but it pairs with the pandemic, right? The pandemic has highlighted that moms are under supported, grossly under supported, and yet we are fed these messages through the media, through fellow moms not telling us like it is, that we need to be a certain way. We need to be selfless. We need to be like the giving tree, give, 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 give some more, and then have nothing left for yourself. So I'd love to start there. In your book, I found it fascinating that you really kind of went through the decades and you mentioned how mothers have been perceived throughout the decades. So let's start there. How has the media shaped our views of a quote unquote good mom?
Yeah. So our perception of mothers began way before a lot of us even realize it. When we're growing up and we're watching TV shows, and there's this presentation of what a good mom is. She's, self-sacrificing. She doesn't really make time for herself because it's all about the kids and the family. But everything is also perfect, and every drama, every hiccup seems to be solved by the time the credits roll. And even though we know we're watching a fictional show, it really does kind of help us shape what we think a good mom is, right? They're put together, their house is clean, they have a loving marriage, they hardly ever argue, their kids are well behaved, and if they mess up, again, you jump in and you help save the day and you make everything okay. And that is kind of, I think that leaves us with this idea that we're constantly messing up because our lives rarely look like those lives of parents on TV. And they're also, they're very one dimensional. Like when I was growing up, I rarely saw a single parent family, a family where maybe the grandparents were the primary caregivers, or a parent that had a disability. So it kind of it can make you feel as though you don't fit into the mold of a perfect family if you don't look like what you're seeing on TV. And again, we don't even realize that these images are cemented in our head. It's just kind of how we grow up. And, we take on this belief that a family looks like this family on TV. And then even I worked in media, like you said. I was a journalist for a very long time, and I can't tell you how many body after baby stories I covered. That was like my specialty, I guess. And I would, talk to celebs about, oh, how did you lose the baby weight, or what's it like taking care of a baby? And they oftentimes, if and most of the time, they painted this picture like, oh, I ate right and I exercised, and I'm back into my pre-baby jeans, or I'm back into my skinny jeans, or, they give you all these tips about how they lose weight or got in shape, or how they love getting spit up on, and how waking up in the middle of the night, it's just like you're tired but it's so joyful. And once I actually had a kid, I realized how untrue, what a load of crap all of that was. But you still kind of go into parenthood and you're thinking, well, I want to be beautiful. Like, right, I'm going to take my baby for walks and look well coiffed and cute and together. I'm not going to be overworked, overrun, haggard. And the reality is, those first, I'd say, few years of parenthood are so hard and so surprising. And I think a lot of these images that we see in media kind of set us up for feeling a little bit like failures.
Definitely. We're not doing existing moms any service by not saying how it really is. We're not doing prospective or expectant moms any service by not giving them a heads up and talking real. And so I guess I would argue that, and it's not, I guess that you would argue, you argue that we need to talk about motherhood differently. So in a perfect world, in your opinion, how should we be speaking and talking and teaching all things motherhood?
Yeah. So, I wondered, I after I actually was taking care of an infant, I wondered why none of my friends who had children just like told me, like, how I would feel, or what to really expect about my new life now. And what you focus on when you're pregnant is all the stuff you need. The crib, the car seat, the wipes warmer, which by the way, you don't need, people. You don't need a wipes warmer. But you get all this stuff because you think this is going to make the transition to motherhood easy. This is what you need to prepare. And you do. You do need things to prepare for having a little infant in your home and in your care. But there are so many other things that change in your life that we don't even talk about. How you feel about your body, your relationship with your women friends who don't have kids, your marriage, your sex life, your job. And so it's not, I understand that no one wants to be a Debbie Downer. It's not like you're going to tell your friend you're pregnant and she's going to be like, oh, all this awful stuff is going to happen to you. That's not my goal. My goal is to say, like, here, let's prep for this. So every issue I go over in the book, I also have tips and exercises and things that you can do to prepare, safeguard, or avoid these things that can happen. And I feel like just being prepared, right, just helps you navigate and not feel so crazy when these hiccups are happening.
I love that. You're so right when you say that when the average expectant mom is pregnant, she spends an oversized amount of time researching car seats and cribs, and a very little amount of time thinking about all the other ways, all the other facets of their lives that are going to change. And so you set up the different aspects of someone's life in the book quite well, and you give some thoughts that we should all be having or perhaps preparing for. One aspect of your book that really struck me was you in the chapter on, safeguarding your job and keeping up your professional life. You offered tips on how to not be pushed out of your job. I mean, who's thinking about that when they're pregnant, right? They're thinking about the car seat. So we don't have time to talk about every single tip that you list in your book today, but I do want to talk about some of them. And I want to start with the hobbies and the passions that we all have that often fall to the wayside once the children come along. Um, I think for me, with a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, I've realized that an unhappy mom is not doing, as an unhappy mom, I wasn't doing any service to my children, right? Like, I want my children when they're old and grown, I want them to look back on their childhood and not say, mom always worked, mom was always so tired, mom was always so cranky, mom was always yelling. I want them to say, I had a great home life and mom was happy and smiling and relaxed. And so, talk to me about that though. I mean, there's not a lot of time in the day, there's an awful lot to get done. How can the mothers listening invest in their own happiness despite everything on their plates?
Yeah. I think a lot of us feel like when, it's all about our kids and it's all about our family. And they're the most important thing in our world, but they aren't the only important thing in our world. And what I found from interviewing hundreds of moms all over this country is that, and actually some in Canada, what I found is that if you're burned out and overwhelmed and depleted, which most of us are, you are not being the kind of parent or partner that you want to be, because you're always like a step away from frustration and being frazzled and having your own kind of like meltdown or tantrum, which could just be yelling at your kids or just constantly just feeling like rushed and frustrated and depleted. And your kids notice that. Right. And that has an effect on them. Even if you don't see it in the moment, it does have an effect on them. So I wanted women, parents, primary caretakers, actually. Most of the ones I interviewed were women, but primary caretakers, I want them to start focusing on the things that give them a sense of relief, a sense of calm, and makes them feel fulfilled outside of their children. And I'm not saying that this has to take you, go away for 4 weeks to like surfing camp in Hawaii, which sounds amazing, but I'm not saying do that. I'm saying take time in your day or in your week to focus on something that makes you happy and just you happy. Right. And, I talked to women who, for some, it was starting a charity where they had focus outside their kids because their kids were getting older and didn't need them as much. For others, it was like getting back into a hobby they loved, whether it was running or knitting or writing or podcasting. These are things that you can do. It's not saying it's going to be easy, right? But what I did, for me, I'm a writer. I love writing. I get a lot of joy and fulfillment from writing, and I'm lucky that that's also my career. But what I had to let go of is that every time my little one, he's 4, every time he wanted to play with me, which is all day, I would used to give in. I used to be like, oh, because I felt so bad. I didn't want him to feel like I didn't want to play with him or to feel lonely or to feel neglected in that sense. But the back to the reality is that if you don't play monster trucks every day, all day with your kid, he's going to be fine. You have to cut yourself a little break. Sometimes we just take on everything because we feel like we do it best. We know it's best. It's our job. And it's not your job to sacrifice everything that you need to take care of your children. So I wanted to try to kind of talk to moms about um, finding what makes you happy, what gives you, again, that little sense of relief, that little spark of joy that doesn't have anything to do with your kids, and spend time doing that. 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, maybe it's on Saturdays. But you have to dedicate some time to it.
Yeah, I would say it's a non negotiable. You have to put some effort into uh, keeping, I would say is a better word, keeping that pre child identity. You have in your book a new to do list, I would call it. I start my days with a to do list: laundry, walk the dog, prep dinner, the normal things that I think most of us have on our daily to do list. But you have a to do list with some interesting or thought provoking, what's the word, bullet points. What's on the new to-do list?
Well, I think every single mom should ask herself these questions. The first one is, am I nurturing my marriage or my partnership? The second is my career headed in a good direction if you have a career, right? Your next question is, do I have supportive friends to turn to? And then ask, do I feel good about myself? And then, do I nurture the passions I had before kids? And lastly, have I created a social life or hobbies that have nothing to do with my family? So if you answered no to more than one of those, actually, if you answered no to any of them, I think it's you need to reprioritize, right? And that means putting you back on top of your to-do list some days. Because if you're in a partnership, it needs to be nurturing. If you don't feel good about yourself, why? You should. There should be things in your life that make you feel good about yourself. You do deserve to have interests outside of your kids or your family. You need to be able to talk to people who aren't in your house. And I think actually one of the most important is having a supportive network to turn to. I talked to so many women who felt like they didn't have those mom friends that they needed. And it wasn't always because there were no friends around, it was because they didn't have the right kinds of friends, right? So I'd love to talk to a little bit more about like what kinds of friends that, you know, women should look for, moms should look for. And there are three things that are incredibly important when you're building friendships or you're looking for friends. And that's positivity. When you're around these people, do you feel positive? Do you feel enriched? Do you feel happy? Do you just feel happy? And is it consistency? Can you rely on them? Are there times where you can connect, even if it's via text or video call or FaceTime or emails? Like, are you communicating and connecting and sharing? And then the last one, which I think is the most important, is that do you feel comfortable being vulnerable around these people? Because you don't just want people to like want to celebrate and party with you during the good times. You want to be able to turn to people when you're having a down day or having a tough time or need to get through something, and people who care, who are going to listen, offer feedback if you want it. So all of those things come into play when you're looking for real solid friendships.
I love that you offered up those three qualities that every friendship needs to thrive. But I'm wondering, do you have any words of advice for the parents listening who, first of all, don't particularly like to socialize with strangers and know that that's not me, by the way, but I'm guessing that there are people in the world who don't have the time, effort, or energy. Putting themselves out there, so to speak, sounds like the most miserable experience in the world. Is finding finding new friends, making new friends as an adult worth the effort?
It is. It really is. And I know it's hard. I compared it in my book to like walking into the junior high the first day of school into the cafeteria and not knowing where to sit. It brings all those insecurities percolating back to the surface. I have felt it, and it is a little bit nerve-wracking. But I also know that I needed, once I entered this new phase of my life, I needed people who understood what I was going through. So for a lot of people, it will be finding new mom friends, maybe at the playground at their kids' school or a parenting group or online. There are lots of really amazing online mom groups. But it could also be reconnecting with someone you knew from your past or someone you grew up with or a family member or a cousin you can talk to and who can be some kind of support. Because what I found is that women wanted someone to not just talk to, but someone who could understand where they were coming from and what they were going through. You don't want someone who's going to judge or make unfair comparisons or make you feel as though you're being preached to. You want someone to kind of listen to you who's on your level, who understands how hard it is in this day and time. We're not raising kids 50 years ago or 20 years ago. We're not even raising kids the same way as we did 5 years ago. So we really have to like find people that we can talk to, even just complain to. I have one girlfriend who we love talking and complaining about things that go on in our kids' school, and then I have another one where we talk about the Real Housewives all the time. Like, your friends don't have to, be all the same and give you the same thing that you need. Different friends can serve different purposes in your life, but you do need connection.
Yeah. It's an interesting phenomenon when you're a new mom and you're home with a baby for maternity leave or perhaps forever if you do not work outside of the home. You're with another human all day long and you need alone time, need time to breathe. Yet, also, at least in my case, I also felt profoundly lonely in that first year. Um, and you write about modern day mommy loneliness, I believe you called it in the book. And I would say that if you have a partner, you can't put it all on your partner all the time. And for me, finding and keeping and nurturing friends gave me that network, or that village would probably be a better word, that I was so craving.
Yeah. And I think what a lot of people don't realize when you're reluctant to kind of make that step and make a friend, it's that if you are craving connection and you're lonely, I can guarantee you most people that you're seeing feeling the same way. You know, everyone is going through this epidemic of loneliness, especially right now. And so you do have to like step out of your comfort zone a little bit and reach out and talk to someone or form a connection, or text an old friend and be like, hey, what's going on? I just thought we could catch up. Or you have to like make those first steps, because it does take time. It takes time to build trust, to make friends, to understand someone's ups and downs and where they're coming from. It's not like you're going to see someone at the grocery store and be like, oh, that's my friend's soulmate. That's like my you have to get to know a person, but you can do that over walks to the park. You can do it over play dates, volunteering together, over the phone, over text. There are so many ways to make a connection, and it doesn't have to be these big, profound moments like dual family vacations or anything like that. There are little ways you can make friends.
Well, I'm totally putting you on the spot here, but in your book, you mentioned a specific amount of time that research says you need to put into a friendship. Can you talk more on that?
Uh, yeah, of course. So there's this researcher at the University of Kansas, and he found that it takes 150 hours to cement a solid, lasting friendship. I When I read that, I was like, this is horrible. Like, who has I barely have an hour of extra time in my day. But when I broke it down, and again, when I was talking to mom groups and mom friends, and I really thought about it, there are ways that you make up those hours. It's not like, again, okay, let's spend 10 hours driving our kids to, you know, Disney or something like that. It happens in little bits and pieces and little moments and down moments. You could be having coffee and you start talking about your life and sharing something. So it's time. That time is important, and you have gone through hours and hours with someone without even realizing it. But it's also the quality of those conversations. Like, again, that's where that vulnerable piece comes in. Like, when you're talking, are you sharing things about your life? Are you listening to that person share about their life? Are you taking it in? I think all of that is built into those 150 hours. You may not even realize it, but after 10 play dates, you've already probably spent like 15 hours with someone. And that's, so it sounds daunting, but you're already doing it and you don't even realize it.
Mm. Well, I want to talk to you about your best tips and thoughts for managing our professional lives as well as managing our relationship with our partner. Which one do you want to talk about first? I'll let you choose.
Oh, let's do partner. That's a good one. That could be a tricky one.
Okay, yes, it can be. It is a tricky one in this household. I want to just set up my question to you by saying that I am in charge of like all the invisible work. I'm working on it with my husband. He's probably listening and he's cursing the cursing this podcast right now, but it's true. And because I am the default parent, if you know me in my real life, if anybody in my real life is listening, you know that I bemoan being the default parent, the parent who, you know, is always on, really, always on. And the invisible work plus the default parenting really leaves me feeling an awful lot of resentment most days. And so then the problem becomes, well, my marriage becomes transactional. Like, okay, well, I did this, this, and this. You need to do X, Y, and Z to make up for it so that we're balanced and even. So I guess that's my first question. How can we make our relationships, I'm going to use the word marriage just because I'm married, no shade to anybody who's not, but how can we make our relationships, our marriages less transactional and more like acting, living, doing out of a place of love as opposed to obligation?
Yeah. So I call this like Lamaze for your marriage because I feel like you and this is, great if you're just starting out and you have young kids, but this also works if you have older kids. And it's this idea that you have to kind of prep and prepare for how you communicate once you're married and once you have this like partnership. And I think what I found is that most couples never talk about what family life looks like on a day to day. They just kind of, it just starts evolving. And then suddenly you start doing things as like my great grandmother would call, there are pink roles and there are blue roles, and then the mom just naturally takes on these roles and the dad just naturally takes on these other roles. And that's just not the way we live anymore, right? Because moms are just as busy and overworked and pulled in every direction, and dads are busy and overworked and pulled in every direction. So I feel like there has to be a lot more communication about expectation, because that's what this resentment comes from. You're drowning in the sea of unmet, of these expectations that you have, and then your expectations for the other person aren't necessarily being met. So I really encourage couples to like sit down, not in anger, because this is what happens usually. Like, you watch your spouse pass by the garbage can that's full, and he hasn't taken it out, and he passed by it 5 times in the kitchen, and then suddenly like you freak out. You're like, I don't understand, don't you see the garbage can there? Why can't you take the garbage out? Like, or help with the laundry, or help the kids get ready in the morning. And I think what we vocalize our anger and resentment in that moment, which is natural, right? So I used to have this issue with my husband because I'd be like sweating bullets getting the kids ready in the morning, or we're going on some outing or something on the weekend. And then he's like leisurely putting on his socks and he's sitting, and I'm thinking, I need another shower because I've been like running around so much. And he's so leisurely. And I would get so angry, and I would spend the rest of the day kind of seething and annoyed and really kind of just upset with him all day. And I wouldn't vocalize why, right? So what I started doing was, when we had something going on, I tell him, this is what we need to get out the door tomorrow. You take Aiden, I'll take Lex. You get him ready, then you pack the snacks, do this. Like, it's kind of like this divide and conquer. But if you keep waiting for your partner to intuit what you want, you're going to keep being resentful. And I think that what you have to do is you have to set up a plan. It's not going to work perfectly every time, right? You have to say, okay, you take care of this week, I'll take care of this. You have to ask for the help that you need, and that's really going to help a lot with the resentment. Again, it's not going to work perfectly every time. You might get some resistance because you might be like, why do I have to start going to the dentist appointments? Or why, wait, what, you didn't, but it's hard because if you most people who read my book or read my writing, they're the default parent. This is the person who takes care of all those things that are, it's not just the things that you see. It's not just like making lunches or dinners or driving the kids to school. There's like remembering it's time for the dental checkup. It's remembering that there's a bake sale, or to make a costume, or to buy this. There are all these things that are running through your mind where you never have downtime. Well, I say, why not give some of that responsibility to your partner and make it clear that that's the expectation, so everyone kind of knows what they're supposed to be doing. And if it doesn't get done, well, then you have a right to get a little, PO'd. So you have a right to like say, but like, ask for the help that you need. And I think that will help. That will go a long way to cutting back on some of the resentment.
Mm. I should also say here too that my husband and I were stuck. We can still very easily get restuck, but in a pattern of communication where I'm operating from a place of resentment, frustration. And so when I talk to him, it comes off as nagging. And so then he gets defensive, and then everything gets bigger and more emotional. Like, spoiler alert to expecting parents, a lot of times people think that having a child is going to bring the parents closer together. It's going to bring the family together. That is often not the case. Do you have anything you want to say there?
Yeah, so I think that people, again, when they're focusing on having a baby, it's all about the baby, and they don't break down how this is going to change everything about their lives. You're not just tired, you're stretched so thin. And I think that people don't realize that when you're tired and you feel overworked and you're stressed, it really does affect if you want to be intimate, or if you're annoyed all the time with your spouse. And I think people are kind of surprised by that, because obviously the baby is made with so much love, and you're so excited, and you're thinking like, oh, this is, I'm more in love with him, or I'm more in love with her than ever. And then, they're chewing loudly and you want to like choke them. so, I think that one of the ways that helps um, mitigate this is, I recommend, and I have these questions in my book. Sit down together, before the baby comes, or even if you have young children now, and just go to dinner. I don't know, go to a park bench, go when the kids are asleep, when it's a calm time and it's a peaceful time, and you're not angry at each other for something. Just sit down, each of you gets a pad of paper, and then ask a question, like, how do you think a day in our family, a Saturday should go in our family, and you each write it down, and then you kind of share what you wrote. It's really about, because a lot of times I notice that couples have completely different perceptions about how family life should go, or what family life should be like. And I think like sharing that and understanding that, but it's not just those things. I found that couples argue over things they never even thought they would argue about. So, like, will the kids be allowed to have sleepovers? Right? How often will the grandparents visit? All of these things can cause tension, because you don't plan for them, you don't think about them, but they are important things to talk about. So I think if you talk about them when in moments of not high frustration and high stress, it could be really helpful. You may not always agree, but at least you know where the other person's coming from.
Yeah. There's a lot to be said for just sitting across the table from your partner and having a conversation, like no screens, eye contact. I mean, you know, when you go out to dinner with somebody and you get to reconnect, it's the same thing. Parents might not have the free time to go out to dinner every week, but if you can just put the kids to bed, sit across the table with one another, and find ways to talk and reconnect and look in each other's eyes and talk from a place, a heart first place, as to like a anger or frustration first place. I'm still working on that personally, but
Well, it's interesting, because I also found with a lot of couples, when I interviewed them, there were little moments of intimacy were just gone, right? And by intimacy, I mean like kissing in the morning. Some couples even say good morning to each other. But or just asking, hey, how's your day? And waiting for an answer, or just touching, like, or holding hands, or smiling, or like you said, looking in your eye and like looking in their eyes and talking to them. All those like little forms of intimacy help someone feel seen and loved and cared for. And I think that sometimes we're so busy, we just don't do them, or we're so annoyed or tired, we just don't do them. But you have to make a concerted effort. Like, I also write in the book that, there are times where it's okay that your relationship comes first, right? Of course, you have to make sure your kids have everything they need. But if you need to work on your partnership or your marriage, that's incredibly important, because that also benefits your children if you have a solid, supportive relationship with your partner.
we all know, let's say you've been asked, how's your day? We all know what it feels like when somebody's truly listening to our answer versus just going through the motions and asking it. So maybe step one is just slowing down those little moments during the day for greater intimacy. I'm going to work on that myself, but I want to I want to wrap up this conversation by talking about work. I know you had alluded to having some difficulties at work after you went back to work. So let's start there. What problems do new mothers often face in their professional lives?
I think what people don't realize is that when they come back to work, they may face a different perception of what they are like as workers, or their work product. And there's lots of research to back this up. There's something called the motherhood penalty, and it's when you come back to work and your ability to do the work or your dedication is seen as not as they don't seem as committed as someone who doesn't have children. And we've seen a lot of cases of discrimination. There are thousands of cases that are filed every year with mothers complaining or lodging complaints that they're treated differently or they've been discriminated against. And so I think that's really surprising and shocking, because you're at really the most vulnerable stage in your life personally, and you come back to work and you may face this kind of problem, and it's horrifying, right? Because like, we should live in a place that respects and lauds and supports mothers, not a place where they feel like they are penalized for having another thing to focus on in their lives. But that does happen a lot. So and I felt that it happened to me, and it happened to a lot of the women that I interviewed. And so one of the ways that you can safeguard yourself is making sure that you know the law, making sure that you know the company policy and the law in your state and what your rights and if you're protected. And then, I think one of the things that this lawyer I interviewed, she had this great advice. She's like, before you go on maternity leave, when you're sitting down with HR and you're mapping out how long you'll be gone, if you have a leave policy at your company, let them know that you know what the laws are. And then you also want to make sure that you understand all of your work product, right? So up to that point, if you've had all good reviews, make sure you take a note of that. Also make note of all the, wins you've had or the accomplishments you had, or like how much overtime you put in or how much extra work you've done. Just be clear about what you contribute so that you can defend yourself if you need to. Because I also found that a lot of women, when they're away, there are complaints made in their files while they're on maternity leave, and so when they come back, there's always kind of like a case starting to build against them. I mean, it's really terrible, right? You don't think about this when you're planning to have a kid, but these are things that they're happening to women all over this country. So it's, and if you feel like you need advice, go and get legal advice. Have a consultation with a lawyer to find out like what you should do, like what would be your first steps if you feel like you're being pushed out. Because there are more and more cases of mothers winning legal cases against their companies when they sue about discrimination. So I just feel like we can't like just kind of sit idly by and let this happen. It's not fair. It's not right. And there is more and more support for women who are facing discrimination in the workplace.
I love it. You've offered so many amazing thoughts based on your interviews and research. Do you have any final tips?
Um, yeah, I just want everyone to feel as though people always say, "Can you have it all?" And I don't think that's the question anymore, because it's what is having it all. It's going to mean something different to every person, and that image of having it all that we see in TV and movies is just, I still don't know how all those TV moms kept their houses clean. It's like I don't know how they do it. And then had careers, and then had great sex with their husband and was never tired, and I just don't know how they do it. But I think you have to ask yourself, not can I have it all? Can I, what makes me happy? Like, and there can be different things. It's like my kid's doing well at school, my son's little league game, my girls' weekend, or my new job, or there are lots of things. You are made up of many different parts, and it's okay to give attention to some of those other parts that aren't your children. And it's just, your happiness matters, and it greatly impacts your family. Actually, there's this amazing study that showed that a mother's happiness was a greater determinant of a child's social emotional growth and their ability to communicate and be happy people than anything else. So your happiness matters, moms, and I just really want you to focus on it, because it's going to do you a world of good as well as your entire family.
Well, if that isn't motivation to be a little bit less selfless and a bit more selfish, I don't know what is. Ericka, tell my listeners where you can be found online, where your book can be found. Give us all the details.
So I'm constantly writing for parenting sites, parents.com, The Bump, mom.com, Cafe Mom. So you can read my writing there, but you can also find me on Instagram at Ericka Sóuter. And my website is erickasouter.com, where I also have a lot of my parenting work up there. And you can buy the book at Barnes & Noble, Target, Amazon, Bookshop. So wherever books are sold, please take a look. And I'd love for you to let me know what you think. I love talking to moms. I will respond if you email me, because, we're pretty cool people and we have a lot to say.
Well, Erica, thank you so much for this conversation. I enjoyed every single second of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.